Do you think there's ever been a time where, because you told us the line that, or the joke that Booker T had been fed by Vince and it didn't land, and then Booker had to apologize, even though it was Vince's words.
Yeah.
Do you think you ever saw anything like that with a wrestler, where a wrestler goes out and does exactly what Vince says, the fans shit on it, it dies, and then Vince is in your ear convincing you to shit on the talent? I mean, does that something like that happen?
A couple of times. He wrote something for Jericho one time, and Jericho's one of the most entertaining guys in the history of the business. I love Chris. To this day, I think Chris's gimmick right now is fantastic. I mean, people chanting for him to retire and him telling you he's the learning tree. I mean, Chris is constantly reinventing himself. I love Chris. I have a huge admiration for Chris. But, he wrote Suffering Succotash or whatever it was for fucking Roman Reigns one time.
Yes.
That's the worst shit I've ever heard. I mean, you really want him to say that? And nobody got that. He'd written something for Chris, and it didn't work. And Vince right away is in my ear. It's the opening segment of Raw. And Vince says, this is the worst thing I ever put on television. And I just kind of laughed, and he goes, say it. I go, you're got to be kidding me. I said, this is the worst thing I've ever seen on television. And Michael Cole looks at me like, what are you doing? And then he realized, of course, that Vince is saying it. But Vince, exactly. And I felt so bad because I love Chris. But Chris had given some lines or something. Chris, by the way, people are going to take this out of context, and I hate that. Chris did 100 different segments. This was the one and only part of it that was awful because it was written bad.
Yeah.
And then Vince bashed the writing. He didn't bash how Chris said it. He bashed what was said. Vince wrote it. You got to be kidding me. Hey, I'll tell you another thing about Michael Cole. Cole was Cole's a stand-up dude, by the way. I mean, a 100% stand-up dude. He's a man. I love Michael, and I love him for this reason, because you never have to worry about where his feet are. I mean, they're going to be right beside you no matter what. But Vince would feed me stuff sometimes that was wrong. Now, again, it's his sandbox. Okay, I'm not a real commentator. He would say this is the first time this man won the Intercontinental Championship. I know it's not. I don't have a way to tell Vince that this guy's won it 10 years ago. This is the second time he's won it. I don't have a way to tell him that. Vince wants this said. So I would just say it. And people would, bash me for that. How can you say that? Don't you know better than that? You don't understand the dynamic. It's not worth the fight. Well, Michael Cole invariably would say, why'd you say that? That's dumb. I'm like, you motherfucker. Because Vince knows Michael's taking a shot at him. So Vince would get in my ear, that little mealy mouth from Syracuse, God, he wants to fuck with me. I'm like, oh, no. Oh, my God. Why did you do this? Michael would do that. It was so funny because Vince would say something that either Michael thought didn't make sense or was not factual. Michael would call me on it every single time, knowing it's poking the bear.
Yes.
Well, now all Vince is interested is he's going to get Michael back by the end of the show. And I'm just the conduit. I'm like, you got to be, would you please leave that man alone? Quit saying this. Michael thought it was the funniest thing ever. Michael's told the story before. Michael got chewed out one time about something. He got chewed out a lot, by the way. Like I say, he treated us differently. And, he wanted Michael to have this level of perfection, which, by the way, there's been other play-by-play guys that came in that Vince, I was there, did not treat like that. He treated Michael really harshly. And I think it's because two things. He liked Michael and he knew how talented Michael was. But he was tough on him. I mean, really tough on him. And one time he had really chewed him out. Michael walks into Gorilla and he has his finger out of his holster and he's pointing at Vince and he's telling him he is a professional. Don't you ever say that shit to me again. I will walk out of here. And he reads Vince McMahon the freaking riot act in front of everybody, which is something you don't do. If you get Vince alone in his room and you read the riot act to him, he has no issue with that. If you do it in front of people, that man bows up. That's something you don't do. And Vince was sitting there just looking at me. It was such a departure from normal Michael. He cuts this promo you wouldn't believe on Vince, and he storms out. And I'm right behind Michael. And Vince looks up at me and goes, "What's he hot about?" I go, "I don't know. I guess he had a bad night." And Vince goes, "God damn, fuck." And just put it.
My God. Listen, I know that some people are going to hear what you just laid out about Vince being hard on certain announcers, and it's not going to resonate with them. But if you've played sports, and I know that some people are going to be annoyed with this, man, I had a football coach. That's how he motivated people. He would stay in your ass. And by the way, he did that with his best players. He didn't do that with the kids who weren't ever didn't have an opportunity. He would push them to be better and to make their, performance better. He wanted to bring out the best in them. Do you think that's where Vince's stuff came from? Or is it just Vince is a maniacal asshole, or a combination of both?
I don't think he's a maniacal asshole. I love him. I really do. I just, I think, and I love my old football coach. I had a football coach in Sweetwater High School, W.T. Stapler, who's in the Hall of Fame in Texas high school football. He called me every name you could ever call me. I mean, he called me a pussy. He called when you're a 16-year-old kid getting called that by a grown man, it's demoralizing, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. They believed, old coaches like you had, believed in the military, system where you'd break kids down because you want to know where they are when you go into battle. I understand football is not battle like you go into military battle, but that's how they would associate it with. And so you got treated differently. I remember we had, 110 degrees down in practice down in Texas one day. I remember thinking I was baking. And you had a little PVC pipe with a little bit of water hose plucked out of them with the garden hose. You're able to get a 2-minute drink during practice in 3 hours, because they thought it made you tough. It's just a different mindset. And Vince grew up in a military school. I think he got kicked out, but he grew up in a tough environment. He grew up with a stepdad who was not good to him. And he grew up in a tough environment of that old school training. And that's how he treated most of the guys. Now, if you asked me during that time where Vince reamed me the most, did he love me? And I'd say, yeah, absolutely. I had no problem with that. Most of the guys didn't. That's changed. That was generational. What's changed now, and it may be better now. It may be 100% better now. I wouldn't change my generation for the world of what it was, but that was just Vince being a tough old guy trying to get a product better. And for the most part, Michael understood that. Michael went off on that one day, and Vince, to his credit, swallowed it, learned from it, and treated Michael differently from that point going forward. He still would yell at him and still call him names, but that's the way guys talked back then. Gerald Briscoe went and did something with NXT not too long ago, and he said, "Hey man, you're hitting their ropes," and he used a pretty tough term. And they said, "You can't say that anymore." He goes, "It offends people." And Gerald's like, "What? I can't do that." It's just a different mindset. And I'm not saying that ours was right. I'm giving you the rationale behind why we did this, not explaining or trying to say what we did was okay. Not you judge that for yourself. I'm just telling you what went on in that generation. And that to me is where Vince McMahon came from.